somewhere in northern Nigeria, buried under centuries of rain and wind and forgetting, a wall still stands. It is not a small wall. It stretches for miles across the landscape, thick as a house at its base, taller than two men standing on each other's shoulders. Red earth, packed so tight that 500 years of weather have not broken it. Trees have grown through its cracks. Villages have been built against it. Roads have been carved around it. But the wall remains. And if you ask the people who live near it, the farmers, the traders, the children walking to school in the morning, they will tell you the same thing their grandparents told them, and their grandparents before that. They will say, "This is Amina's wall. She built it. She built all of them." Now, imagine hearing that for the first time. Imagine standing in front of a fortification older than the Taj Mahal, older than the Palace of Versailles, older than almost anything still standing in the Americas, and being told it was built on the orders of a woman, a queen, a conqueror, someone who commanded an army of 20,000 warriors in an age when most women on earth were not permitted to own property, let alone wage war. You would want to know her name, you would want to know her story, and you would want to know why, in a world that remembers Alexander and Caesar and Genghis Khan, almost nobody outside of West Africa has ever heard of her. This is that story, not the simplified version, not the footnote, the real one, as close as history and memory and 5 centuries of oral tradition can bring us to a woman who should have been one of the most famous human beings who ever lived. Let us begin not with Amina, but with the world that made her. The year is 1533. Henry VIII sits on the throne of England, obsessed with producing a male heir. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent is the most powerful state on the planet. Spanish conquistadors are dismantling the Inca Empire piece by piece, and in the heart of what we now call northern Nigeria, a collection of city-states known as the Hausa kingdoms are doing something that most of Europe has not yet figured out. They are getting extraordinarily, systematically rich. The Hausa kingdoms are not a single empire. They are 7 major city-states: Kano, Katsina, Zazzau, Gobia, Rano, Dara, and Biram. Each one independent, each one powerful, each one connected to the others through trade, rivalry, intermarriage, and occasional war. Think of them the way you might think of Renaissance Italy, Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome, independent powers sharing a culture but constantly competing for dominance. And like Renaissance Italy, the engine driving everything is commerce. The Hausa kingdoms sit at the southern end of the trans-Saharan trade routes, one of the great commercial arteries of the medieval world. Gold moves north, salt moves south. Ivory, textiles, leather goods, cola nuts, and enslaved people flow in every direction. Horses bred near Lake Chad are traded westward. Weapons forged in Hausa blacksmith shops, weapons capable of cutting through imported European steel, travel to buyers across the continent. The wealth this generates is staggering. These are not villages of mud huts. These are cities, real cities. Kano alone has walls stretching for miles around a population of tens of thousands. Its markets draw merchants from as far away as Venice, Cairo, and Tripoli. Scholars in Kano and Katsina study mathematics, Islamic jurisprudence, astronomy, and medicine in institutions that rival anything in Timbuktu or Fez. Buildings rise 2 and 3 stories high. Dyed leather goods from the Hausa lands are so prized in Europe that the English language borrows a word for fine leather, Moroccan, from the North African middlemen who sell Hausa products to European buyers. This is the civilization that produces Amina, not a primitive backwater, not a place waiting to be discovered by Europeans, a thriving, sophisticated network of states fully integrated into global trade, producing art, scholarship, military innovation, and political complexity that matched anything on the planet in 1533. Zazzau sits at the crossroads of everything. South of Kano, north of the Forest Kingdoms, positioned perfectly to control trade moving in every direction. And in the royal palace of Zazzau, a girl is born to King Nikotau, the 22nd ruler of the kingdom, and his queen, Bakwa Turunku. They name her Amina. Now, every great story has a moment where the path splits, a moment where the person at the center of it could have gone one way, lived a quiet life, disappeared into the ordinary current of history, or could have gone another way entirely. For Amina, that moment comes early. She is a princess. She is wealthy, protected, educated. She has a brother named Karama who will inherit the throne. Her future, by every expectation of her time and place, is mapped out before she can walk. She will learn the arts expected of a noblewoman. She will be married to a prince from a neighboring kingdom, Kano, perhaps, or Katsina, in an alliance that benefits Zazzau. She will bear children. She will manage a household. She will be remembered, if at all, as someone's wife, someone's mother. Amina looks at this future and refuses it. The details of how this refusal takes shape are preserved in oral tradition rather than written record, which means we cannot pin down exact dates or conversations. But the broad strokes are consistent across every version of the story. At an age when other princesses are learning courtly graces and preparing for marriage negotiations, Amina demands something unprecedented. She demands military training. Try to understand what this means in context. The Hausa military tradition is not ceremonial. It is not symbolic. It is a system designed to produce killers. Warriors train from childhood in mounted combat, sword fighting, spear work, archery, siege tactics, and the coordination of large-scale cavalry operations. The Hausa cavalry, mounted on horses bred specifically for war, is among the most effective military forces in West Africa. Training with them means bleeding with them. It means years of physical punishment that breaks bones and builds calluses and turns soft hands into weapons. Amina walks into this world and demands to be part of it. And somehow, through force of will, through her mother's political influence, through some quality in her that even hardened warriors recognize as extraordinary, she is allowed in. Her mother matters enormously here, and most versions of the story do not give Bakwa Turunku enough credit. When King Nikotao dies around 1549, the throne does not immediately pass to young Karama. Instead, Bakwa Turunku, through political skill that tells you exactly where Amina inherited her talent, maneuvers herself into a position of real authority. Whether she ruled as formal regent or simply wielded power behind the throne, the effect is the same. Amina grows up watching the woman exercise political control in a world that is not designed for women to hold power. She learns from this. She absorbs it into her bones. And so, while her brother Karama eventually takes the throne, Amina is not sitting in the women's quarters learning to weave. She is in the training grounds, in the saddle, on the practice field, learning how to read terrain, how to command a cavalry charge, how to break a siege, how to keep men alive on a campaign that stretches for weeks across hostile territory. She is learning the grammar of war. By her late teens, she is riding with Zazzau's military expeditions, not watching from a safe distance, riding with them, fighting in skirmishes, observing how supply lines work, how morale breaks, how a single tactical decision can turn a defeat into a victory. The men around her, career soldiers who've been fighting since before she was born, begin to notice something unsettling. This princess is not a novelty. She is not a political gesture. She is genuinely, terrifyingly good at this. And then her brother does something that changes everything. Karama could have sidelined her. Most kings would have. A warrior's sister is an embarrassment at best, a political threat at worst. But Karama looks at Amina the way a chess player looks at the most powerful piece on the board, and he puts her to use. He gives her command of cavalry units. He consults her on strategy. He sends her to lead campaigns on his behalf. For 16 years, from approximately 1549 to 1565, Amina serves as one of Zazzau's top military commanders. She leads expeditions against rebellious tributaries. She defends against border incursions. She builds something more valuable than any fortress. She builds loyalty. The warriors who serve under her do not merely respect her, they are devoted to her. She shares their hardships. She eats what they eat. She sleeps on the same ground. She mourns their dead by name. And she wins. Again and again and again, she wins. Again and again, she wins. During these years, pressure mounts for Amina to marry. In the political calculus of medieval West Africa, a princess is a chess piece. Marry her to a neighboring prince and you buy peace for a generation. Marry her to a powerful clan leader and you secure internal loyalty. Everyone around Amina, advisors, nobles, foreign emissaries, understands her value as a bride. Amina understands something different. She understands that marriage means control, not hers, someone else's. A husband would have authority over her, would redirect her energy from warfare to domesticity, would transform her from a commander into a consort. And so she makes a decision that is breathtaking in its audacity for any era, let alone the 16th century. She refuses to marry, not temporarily, not conditionally, permanently. Some traditions say she took lovers, warriors, or captured princes who shared her bed for a single night and were sent away at dawn. Others say she remained entirely alone, wedded to nothing but Zazzau and the sword. The truth is probably unknowable at this distance, but the message behind the decision is crystal clear, and it echoes across 500 years. I belong to no one. My life is my own. My purpose is my own. And if you want to understand what I am, do not look at whose wife I am. Look at what I have built. In 1565, King Karama dies, and every calculation, every alliance, every carefully constructed expectation about Zazzau's future, all of it collapses into a single terrifying question. What happens now? The death of a king is never just a death. It is an earthquake. It cracks open every fault line in the kingdom, every rivalry, every grudge, every quiet ambition that has been held in check by the simple fact that someone was sitting on the throne. When Karama dies in 1565, those cracks split wide open in Zazzau. There are cousins, there are nephews, there are distant branches of the royal bloodline, men whose claim to the throne is thin but technically legitimate. Men who have been waiting, some patiently, some not, for exactly this moment. In any other kingdom, in any other era, the succession would have been settled quickly. The strongest male relative would take the throne, the court would fall in line, and life would continue. But Zazzau is not any other kingdom, and 1565 is not any other moment. Because standing in the middle of the succession crisis, with 16 years of military command behind her, with the loyalty of the most powerful fighting force in the region, with a reputation that stretches from the Sahara to the forest belt, is Amina. The deliberations that follow Karama's death must have been extraordinary. Picture the court of Zazzau, nobles in embroidered robes, Islamic scholars whose religious authority can legitimize or destroy a claim to power. Military commanders whose swords are the final argument in any political dispute. And the question on the table is one that has almost never been asked in Hausa political history. Can a woman sit on the throne? The arguments against are obvious, and they are loud. Tradition demands a male ruler. Islamic scholars can cite interpretations of religious law that restrict female authority. Neighboring kingdoms will see a queen as weakness, an invitation to attack, to test Zazzau's defenses, to carve away territory while the kingdom is led by someone they consider unfit by birth. But the arguments in favor have something the opposition lacks. They have evidence. 16 years of evidence, campaigns won, borders secured, trade routes protected. Warriors who have bled beside Amina and would bleed beside her again without hesitation. The military does not deal in theory or tradition. The military deals in results, and Amina's results are unassailable. There is another argument, unspoken but understood by everyone in that room. The men who oppose Amina's claim, the cousins, the nephews, the ambitious nobles, which of them can match her? Which of them has commanded armies? Which of them has the loyalty of Zazzau's warriors? Which of them can hold together a kingdom surrounded by rivals who would love nothing more than to see Zazzau tear itself apart? The answer is none of them, and everyone knows it. Amina becomes queen, Amina of Zazzau. The warrior princess becomes the warrior monarch. Whether the decision is unanimous or bitterly contested, whether it comes through consensus or through the implicit threat of military force, the sources do not tell us clearly. What they tell us is the outcome. By 1565, Amina rules, and she does not waste a single day. There is a concept in military strategy, and in life, honestly, that the first thing you do after gaining power determines everything that follows. It sets the tone. It tells the world who you are and what you intend. Some rulers begin with diplomacy, sending emissaries to neighboring courts with assurances of peaceful intentions. Some begin with internal reform, reorganizing their administration and securing domestic loyalty. Some begin with celebration, rewarding allies and consolidating the coalition that brought them to power. Amina begins with war, within months of taking the throne. Some oral traditions say within weeks. She assembles an army and marches south. Her target is not random. It is a territory that has been resisting Zazzau's authority, disrupting trade caravans moving toward the forest regions, testing whether a change in leadership means a change in Zazzau's willingness to project force. Amina intends to answer that question so decisively that no one asks it again. The army she leads is enormous for the time and place. Roughly 20,000 warriors, cavalry mounted on war horses, infantry carrying iron-tipped spears and swords forged in Hausa workshops, archers with composite bows that can punch through leather armor at 100 paces, and engineers trained in siege warfare. Moving 20,000 people across open terrain requires logistics that would challenge a modern military planner. Food, water, fodder for horses, weapons, medical supplies, all coordinated across days or weeks of marching. That Amina can organize this within months of taking power tells you something about how thoroughly she prepared for this moment. She did not stumble onto the throne. She was ready. The campaign is fast. Brutally, almost shockingly fast. Amina employs what will become her signature approach, rapid cavalry movement combined with psychological warfare. Her horsemen appear on the horizon before the enemy expects them, moving with a speed that seems impossible for such a large force. Before the first arrow flies, the message is already delivered. We are here, we are many, and we are not afraid. Surrender now, and the terms will be generous. Fight, and you will lose everything. The rebellious territory submits. Its ruler bends the knee, swears allegiance, opens his granaries and his treasury to Zazzau. Trade routes are secured. Caravans begin moving again under Amina's protection. The message radiates outward like a shockwave. The new queen is not a placeholder. She is not a figurehead. She is the most dangerous person in Horseland, and she is just getting started. But here is where Amina does something that separates her from every conqueror who came before her in this part of the world. After the fighting stops and the treaties are signed, she does not simply collect tribute and march home. She builds. She orders the construction of massive earthwork fortifications around the conquered settlement. Not flimsy wooden stockades that will rot in the rain. Not temporary defenses to be abandoned when the army moves on. Permanent walls. Thick walls, bases wide enough to drive a cart across, heights that dwarf a man on horseback. Walls made of compressed red earth, packed so dense that they resist erosion, resist fire, resist siege weapons, resist time itself. 5 centuries of time, as it turns out. These walls serve 2 purposes, and Amina is brilliant enough to have understood both. The first is military. A walled settlement is exponentially harder to recapture than an open one. Any ruler who submits to Amina and then reconsiders will find himself trapped inside her fortifications, facing an assault from outside while unable to easily escape. Rebellion becomes not just risky, but geometrically more difficult. The second purpose is psychological. The walls say something. They say, "This is permanent." Zazzau is not passing through. Zazzau is not extracting wealth and leaving. Zazzau is here, embedded in the landscape, built into the very earth. You can remove a garrison. You can overthrow a governor, but you cannot remove a wall that is 20 feet thick at its base. The wall is a fact. The wall is a fact. The wall is forever. This is the birth of what history will call the Amina Walls. And over the next decade, as Amina's conquests spread outward from Zazzau like ripples from a stone dropped into still water, the walls will spread with them. Every major settlement that falls under her control gets fortified. Every trade junction, every strategic crossroads, every river crossing that matters. Walls, hundreds of miles of them eventually. Thousands of miles by some estimates. A network of fortifications so extensive that when archaeologists map them in the 20th and 21st centuries, they will struggle to comprehend how a single ruler in a pre-industrial society could have organized construction on this scale. But Amina is not building walls for archaeologists. She is building an empire. After the first campaign, there is a second. After the second, a third. The pattern establishes itself. Rapid military campaign, decisive victory, fortification, integration into Zazzau's trade and administrative network, and then the next campaign. Amina is not expanding randomly. She is methodical. Each conquest connects to the last, extending Zazzau's control over trade routes the way a hand closes around a throat, slowly, steadily, until the grip is total. By the late 1560s, Zazzau controls trade arteries stretching from the southern forest belt, where kola nuts and ivory originate, northward toward the Saharan salt mines, east toward Lake Chad, west toward the lands of the Nupe. The wealth flowing into Zazzau's capital, which later generations will call Zaria, is unlike anything the kingdom has ever seen. Markets expand, new trading quarters spring up to accommodate merchants arriving from across the continent. Artisans flock to the capital, drawn by security and prosperity. Gold, ivory, leather, textiles, kola nuts, salt, horses, an endless river of commerce, all of it flowing through channels that Amina controls. And this is where we need to understand something about Amina that the legends often miss. The songs and stories celebrate the warrior. They celebrate the conqueror riding at the head of her cavalry, sword raised, enemies scattering before her. And that image is real. Amina is genuinely one of the most formidable military leaders of her century, on any continent. But warfare is only half of what makes her extraordinary. The other half is economics. Amina understands something that many conquerors throughout history have failed to grasp. Territory without trade is just dirt. An empire that cannot generate wealth cannot sustain the military that built it. Conquest is a tool, not a goal. The goal is control of commerce, and through commerce, the ability to fund armies, build infrastructure, reward loyalty, and project power far beyond the range of any sword. Every military decision Amina makes has an economic calculation behind it. She conquers territories that control trade junctions. She fortifies settlements along caravan routes. She negotiates or coerces agreements with merchant clans, guaranteeing them security in exchange for tribute and preferential trading terms. She does not simply demand that conquered peoples pay her. She creates conditions where trade through her territories is safer, faster, and more profitable than any alternative. Merchants choose to use her routes because it is good business, and every caravan that passes through Zazzau's domain pays for the privilege. This is empire building at its most sophisticated. Not the crude smash and grab of a raider, but the systematic construction of an economic machine that feeds itself. Trade generates wealth. Wealth funds the military. The military conquers new territory. New territory opens new trade routes. New trade routes generate more wealth. It is a cycle, and Amina keeps it spinning faster and faster with every passing year. By approximately 1568, 3 years into her reign, Amina stands in a position that no ruler of Zazzau has ever occupied. She controls more territory, more trade, and more military power than any of her predecessors. She has transformed a single city-state into the dominant force in Hausland, and she is not finished. What comes next is the most audacious phase of her career. Amina looks at a map, leather and fabric, marked with stones and shells indicating settlements and routes, and she traces a line far beyond Zazzau's current borders. South, toward the Quarahaffa Confederation. West, toward the Nupe Kingdom, deep into territories that no Hausa ruler has ever controlled. Her generals look at this line and see madness. The logistics alone are staggering. Multiple campaigns across thousands of miles of unfamiliar terrain against kingdoms with their own armies, their own walls, their own military traditions. The resources required would strain even Zazzau's swelling treasury. Amina looks at the same line and sees necessity. The world is changing. European traders are appearing on the West African coast in growing numbers, establishing trading posts, introducing new goods, new weapons, new economic pressures. The trans-Saharan routes that have enriched the Hausa kingdoms for centuries will eventually face competition from Atlantic maritime trade. If Zazzau does not expand now, does not control access to both the Saharan and the emerging coastal trade networks, it will be outflanked. Not today, not next year, but inevitably. Amina is not thinking about next year, she is thinking about the next century. And so in 1569, the largest army Zazzau has ever assembled, somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 warriors, marches out of the capital. At its head, as always, rides Amina. The campaigns of 1569 through 1573 are Amina at the peak of her powers. She is in her mid-30s, experienced enough to avoid the mistakes of youth, young enough to endure the physical punishment of campaign life. Her army is battle-hardened, fiercely loyal, superbly organized. A reputation precedes her like a weapon of its own. Settlements surrender at the news of her approach. Their rulers, calculating that generous terms from Amina are preferable to destruction. Those who resist learn what happens when calculation fails. The first major test comes at a river crossing defended by Qurarafa forces, a powerful confederation that has no intention of becoming Zazzau's vassal. The Qurarafa have chosen their ground well. A fortified position on the far bank of a river, with clear fields of fire and natural obstacles that make a direct assault suicidal. A conventional commander would lay siege, wait for supplies to run out, probe for weakness. Amina does not command conventionally. Under darkness, she sends cavalry units upstream and downstream, visible diversions meant to draw attention. Meanwhile, her engineers construct rafts and floating platforms. Not enough to carry the whole army, just enough for a hand-picked force of elite warriors. At dawn, 3 attacks hit simultaneously. The main body creates chaos at the primary crossing. The diversionary cavalry engage at the flanking points, and the elite force, having crossed silently on the rafts, strikes the Qurarafa position from behind. Within hours, the defensive line collapses. The Qurarafa retreat in disorder. It is a masterpiece, not of brute force, but of coordination, deception, and the willingness to take enormous risks in pursuit of decisive results. And the story of it spreads, carried by traders, by refugees, by the Qurarafa soldiers themselves, across West Africa. The warrior queen does not merely fight, she out-thinks you. She attacks where you are not looking. She turns your strengths into weaknesses. And by the time you understand what she is doing, it is already too late. Settlement after settlement falls into Amina's orbit over the next 4 years. Some fight and are broken. Some negotiate and are absorbed peacefully. All of them get walls. The network of Amina's fortifications spreads across the landscape like a web, each point connected to the others by trade routes that are now the safest in West Africa. But conquest at this scale creates something dangerous. It creates fear, and fear, in the world of Hausa politics, creates coalitions. Kano watches Zazzau's expansion and sees its own trade revenues declining. Merchants are choosing Amina's protected routes over Kano's less secure alternatives. Tributary states that once paid allegiance to Kano now send their tribute south to Zazzau. Katsina watches and sees the same thing. 2 of the most powerful Hausa city-states, ancient, wealthy, proud, are being economically strangled by a kingdom they once considered an equal, now led by a woman they consider an aberration. Diplomatic overtures come first. Polite suggestions that perhaps Zazzau is expanding too quickly. Perhaps the trade route should be shared more equitably. Perhaps Queen Amina should focus on consolidation rather than conquest. Amina's response is courteous and absolutely immovable. Zazzau will continue to grow. Any kingdom that objects is welcome to make its case on the battlefield. It is not a bluff. But it is also not wise, because behind closed doors in the courts of Kano and Katsina and half a dozen smaller states, a coalition is forming. They are assembling an army, 40,000 warriors, perhaps 50,000, with one explicit purpose: invade Zazzau, depose the warrior queen, divide her territories, erase her from the map. By late 1574, Amina's intelligence network, traders, spies, sympathetic officials in foreign courts, delivers the news she has been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. War is coming, not a border skirmish, not a trade dispute resolved with swords, an existential war, the kind that ends kingdoms. Everything Amina has built, every wall, every alliance, every soldier she has trained, every trade route she has secured, is about to be tested against an enemy that outnumbers her 2-to-1. And what she does next will either save Zazzau or destroy it. Spring of 1575. And inside the walls of Zazzau's capital, a war council is underway that will determine the fate of an empire. The intelligence is grim, and it keeps getting grimmer. Kano is mobilizing its cavalry, the finest horsemen in the northern Hausa lands. Katsina is assembling siege equipment specifically designed to breach earthwork fortifications, the kind of equipment you only build when you intend to crack open someone's walls. Smaller states, some of them former tributaries of Zazzau, kingdoms that swore allegiance to Amina and now smell an opportunity to break free, are contributing thousands of warriors. The coalition army, when fully assembled, will number somewhere around 40 to 50,000 fighting men. Amina has roughly 20,000. Her advisors are divided. Some council negotiation. Perhaps Amina can offer territorial concessions, pull back from the most recently conquered lands, agree to share trade revenues, even accept some form of symbolic submission to Kano or Katsina. It would be humiliating, but Zazzau would survive. Others suggest a purely defensive strategy. Zazzau has the walls. Amina built them for exactly this kind of threat. Pull every soldier behind the fortifications, stock supplies for a long siege, and let the coalition exhaust itself trying to breach defenses that were designed to be unbreakable. Amina listens to all of it, and then she rejects every word. She does not explain herself gently. She does not soften the truth. The coalition does not want concessions. The coalition wants Zazzau dismantled. They want its trade routes divided among themselves. They want Amina removed, not just from the throne, but from the world. A woman who has humiliated the most powerful kingdoms in Hausland does not get to negotiate her way to safety. She gets destroyed, and her destruction becomes a warning to every other woman who might dare to reach for power. As for hiding behind the walls, Amina has a question for the generals who suggest it. What happens when the siege lasts 6 months, a year? What happens to the trade routes that fund Zazzau's army? What happens to the tributary states watching from a distance, trying to decide which side will win? A kingdom that hides behind its walls is a kingdom that has already lost. It just has not admitted it yet. What Amina proposes instead is so audacious that several of her commanders initially believe she is testing them. She is not. She will not wait for the coalition to invade. She will not defend. She will attack first, but not the coalition army itself. Attacking 50,000 warriors with 20,000 would be suicide, and Amina has not survived this long by being suicidal. Instead, she will attack the coalition's foundation, its supply lines, its tributary states, its political cohesion. She will take the coalition apart piece by piece before it ever reaches Zazzau's walls. The strategy rests on a simple insight that most military leaders of her era, and many in ours, fail to grasp. An army of 50,000 men is not a weapon. It is a logistics problem. 50,000 warriors need food. They need water. They need fodder for horses, replacement weapons, medical care. All of this must flow continuously from somewhere, from farms and granaries and workshops in the coalition states' home territories. Cut that flow, and the army does not starve overnight, but it begins to weaken. Morale drops. Horses lose condition. Soldiers who are hungry fight worse than soldiers who are fed. Commanders who are worried about their supply situation make cautious decisions instead of bold ones. An army that cannot feed itself is an army that is already dying. It just does not know it yet. But Amina's plan goes further than disrupting supply lines. She understands the coalition's greatest vulnerability. It is a coalition. Kano and Katsina are natural rivals forced into temporary alliance by their shared fear of Zazzau. The smaller states joined not out of loyalty to Kano or Katsina, but out of calculation. They believe the coalition will win, and they want to be on the winning side when the spoils are divided. Shift that calculation, and the alliance fractures. Amina divides her forces. The bulk of her army, perhaps 15,000 warriors, stays in and around the capital, visible, drilling, fortifying, creating every appearance of a kingdom preparing for a defensive siege. This is the decoy. Meanwhile, elite cavalry units, fast, disciplined, capable of covering enormous distances, slip out of Zazzau in small groups, heading in different directions, moving at night, using routes that only Amina's scouts know. In late spring of 1575, the trap springs shut, except it is Amina's trap, not the coalition's. 3,000 Zazzau cavalry materialize in Kano's tributary territories to the north. They do not attack Kano itself. The city is too well defended, and that is not the point. Instead, they move through the countryside like a fire through dry grass. Granaries burn. Livestock vanishes. Trade caravans that were carrying supplies toward the coalition's assembly points are ambushed and destroyed. Within weeks, Kano is facing a crisis. The food and resources it pledged to the coalition effort are gone. Smoke rises from a dozen villages, and Kano's own people are beginning to ask a dangerous question. If our army is supposed to be conquering Zazzau, why is Zazzau burning our farms? Simultaneously, another Zazzau force strikes Katsina's southern territories. Same approach. Do not engage the main army. Do not attack fortified positions. Hit the soft underbelly, the farms, the supply depots, the undefended towns that the coalition assumed were safe because the fighting was supposed to happen in Zazzau's territory, not theirs. But Amina's masterstroke is not military. It is diplomatic. While her cavalry is burning granaries and ambushing caravans, her emissaries are visiting every small state in the coalition. They carry a simple message, delivered with the courtesy of a queen and the weight of an army. Zazzau remembers those who stand with her. Zazzau also remembers those who stand against her. States that leave the coalition now will face no consequences. States that remain will be the first targets when this war is over, and this war will be over. The only question is which side of the outcome you want to be on. It is not a bluff. The burning farms in Kano and Katsina prove that it is not a bluff. And the smaller states who never wanted this war in the first place, who joined the coalition because they were afraid of Kano and Katsina and are now being given a reason to be more afraid of Amina, they begin to waver, one by one, quietly, without public announcements that would anger the coalition leadership. They send messages to Zazzau. We are neutral, we will not march, our warriors will stay home. The coalition is hemorrhaging allies before a single major battle has been fought. By midsummer of 1575, the coalition leadership faces a reality that no amount of bravery or anger can overcome. Their supply lines are in chaos, their alliance is fracturing, their timetable has been shredded, but they have committed too deeply to turn back. Kano and Katsina have staked their prestige, their political legitimacy, on destroying Amina. To withdraw now, with farms burning and allies defecting, would be a humiliation that could trigger internal revolts of their own. And so they invade anyway. Roughly 40,000 warriors, reduced from the original 50,000 by defections, march into Zazzau's territory from the north and west. The coalition commanders are experienced men. They know they have been outmaneuvered diplomatically and economically. But they still have numbers, they still have siege equipment, they still believe that raw military force can overcome Amina's tricks. They are about to learn otherwise. The coalition army enters Zazzau's outer territories and finds nothing. Empty villages, stripped granaries, poisoned wells, livestock driven away, crops burned in the fields. Amina has implemented a scorched earth policy across her own borderlands, sacrificing the outermost ring of her territory to deny the invaders any resource they might use. The coalition army, already stressed by disrupted supply lines, must now carry every morsel of food and every drop of water from its own diminishing reserves. The first fortified settlement they reach, one of Amina's walled towns, 3 days' march from the capital, looks like a prize. Strong walls, a substantial garrison visible on the ramparts, stores of food and weapons that the coalition desperately needs. The coalition commanders settle in for a siege. They bring up their equipment, they surround the settlement, they launch assault after assault against walls that were built specifically to resist exactly this kind of attack. Days pass, weeks, casualties mount. The garrison fights with the ferocity of men defending their homes, repelling every attempt to breach the walls. Coalition soldiers begin to sicken. Bad water, inadequate food, the diseases that always breed in overcrowded military camps. And then one morning the defenders are gone. They have evacuated through tunnels that Amina's engineers built beneath the walls for precisely this purpose. The coalition storms through the breached gates and finds nothing. Empty buildings, empty storerooms, not a sack of grain, not a weapon, not a single thing of value. They have spent weeks and hundreds of lives capturing air. It is not just a military failure, it is a psychological devastation. The coalition soldiers have been fighting for weeks against an enemy that was never really there. The supplies they desperately need do not exist. And now they are deeper in Zazzau's territory, further from their own bases, weaker than when they started. And the real battle has not even begun. The coalition presses on towards Zazzau's capital because there is no other option. Retreat now would be catastrophe. At least at the capital, there must be something to fight, something to capture, some way to salvage this disintegrating campaign. They arrive at the walls of Zazzau's capital city in late summer and find what Amina has been preparing for them. 20,000 fresh warriors behind the most formidable fortifications in Hausa, well-fed, well-supplied, fighting on ground they know intimately, with their families behind them and nowhere to retreat. The coalition musters perhaps 30,000 combat-effective troops by this point. 10,000 have been lost to casualties, disease, desertion, and the grinding misery of a campaign that has delivered nothing but empty victories. They outnumber Amina's defenders, but the advantage is far less overwhelming than it was supposed to be, and defenders behind strong walls are worth 2 or 3 times their number in the open field. The coalition sets up camp. They begin siege preparations. Their commanders know this would take time they may not have given their supply situation. But there is no alternative. They get 3 days. On the 3rd night, Amina launches a full-scale assault from inside the city. 10,000 warriors pour out of multiple gates simultaneously, smashing into coalition camps that are still being organized, still being fortified, still adjusting to positions around an unfamiliar city. The attack comes from everywhere at once. Amina's scouts have spent weeks mapping the ground around the capital, identifying dead angles, blind spots, gaps in the coalition's encirclement. The assault forces hit these weak points with precise, coordinated violence. Cavalry charges in the darkness, infantry with torches setting fire to supply wagons, archers raining arrows into camps where men are scrambling from their sleeping mats, reaching for weapons they cannot find in the smoke and chaos. The coalition army does not collapse instantly. There are brave men in that army, experienced soldiers who rally their units, who form defensive lines, who fight back with desperate skill. Pockets of organized resistance hold for hours, but the overall picture is catastrophic. In darkness, coordination breaks down. Panic spreads faster than fire. Units that cannot see each other, cannot support each other. The carefully planned siege dissolves into 100 separate fights, most of which Amina's fresh, well-led warriors are winning decisively. By the time the sun rises over the walls of Zazzau's capital, the coalition army is shattered. Thousands are dead. Thousands are dead. Siege equipment, irreplaceable machines that took months to build and drag across hundreds of miles, is burning. Supply wagons that contained the coalition's last reserves of food and weapons are in Zazzau's hands. What follows is not a battle, it is a disintegration. The coalition army breaks apart and runs. Some units manage organized retreats, holding formation as they fall back northward and westward. Others simply scatter, individual soldiers and small groups fleeing in every direction, abandoning weapons, abandoning wounded comrades, abandoning everything except the desperate desire to be somewhere else. Amina does not let them go quietly. Her cavalry, rested, fed, mounted on fresh horses, pursue the retreating coalition for days, not to annihilate them, although the killing is significant, but to ensure that the retreat becomes a rout, that the survivors carry home not just the news of defeat, but the visceral, bone-deep memory of what it feels like to be hunted by Amina's warriors across open terrain with no walls to hide behind. By the time the remnants of the coalition stagger back to their home territories, more than half the original invasion force has been killed, captured, or scattered beyond recovery. Kano's famous cavalry, the pride of the northern Hausa states, is broken. Katsina's military capacity is gutted. Smaller states that remained in the coalition face the consequences Amina promised. In the weeks and months after the coalition's defeat, Amina unleashes punitive campaigns that redraw the map of Horseland. Territories that supported the invasion are conquered outright and absorbed into Zazzau's domain. Others are forced to pay crushing indemnities, gold, livestock, trade goods, hostages from ruling families to guarantee future loyalty. Kano and Katsina, the architects of the coalition, are forced to accept peace terms that amount to surrender by another name. They will recognize Zazzau's dominance. They will open their markets to Zazzau's merchants at favorable rates. They will pay regular tribute, not technically as vassals, but as what amounts to protection money. The fiction of independence is preserved. The reality of subjugation is understood by everyone. The balance of power in Horseland has not merely shifted. It has been demolished and rebuilt with Amina at the center. And now, in the years immediately following the Coalition War, roughly 1576 through 1578, Amina does something that reveals the full scope of her genius. She stops conquering and starts building. Not walls this time, although the walls continue to rise around every settlement under her control. What Amina builds now is a system, a machine for governing an empire that stretches across territories larger than many European nations. Trade routes are improved and protected. Amina stations garrisons at critical junctions, not just to defend against military threats, but to ensure that merchant caravans move safely and quickly. Traders who use Zazzau's routes report that it is possible to travel hundreds of miles without encountering bandits, without paying arbitrary tolls to petty local rulers, without fear of being robbed or detained. This kind of security is almost unheard of in medieval West Africa, or medieval anywhere, and it draws commerce like a magnet draws iron. More merchants means more trade. More trade means more tax revenue. More revenue means more soldiers to protect, more routes to attract more merchants. The wheel turns and Zazzau grows wealthier with every rotation. Administration becomes formalized. Where previously conquered territories were left largely to govern themselves as long as tribute flowed, Amina now creates structured systems. Governors receive specific instructions on tax collection, the administration of justice, the maintenance of roads and walls, and their obligations to provide warriors when Zazzau calls. Regular inspections ensure compliance, corruption is punished, competence is rewarded. It is the skeleton of a bureaucratic state, not yet fully formed, but recognizable, and far more sophisticated than the loose tributary arrangements that characterized Hausa politics before Amina. She invests in religious legitimacy. Amina is a practicing Muslim, and she understands that in a society where Islam provides the framework for law, education, and moral authority, a ruler who is seen as pious and just commands loyalty that goes deeper than fear. She funds mosques, she supports scholars, she endows schools where the next generation of administrators and judges will be trained. She presents herself not as a revolutionary shattering tradition, but as a faithful ruler who happens to be female, and whose success is evidence of divine favor rather than transgression. And she builds relationships beyond Horseland. Zazzau under Amina trades directly with North African kingdoms and city-states. Caravans from Zazzau reach Tripoli, Cairo, and the Mediterranean ports where African goods enter the European market. Zazzau is no longer a regional power. It is an international one, a node in trade networks that span continents. By 1578, Zazzau under Amina is at its absolute zenith. The kingdom controls an estimated 30,000 square miles of territory. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps approaching 500,000, live under Amina's authority. The capital city of Zaria is one of the great urban centers of West Africa, its markets rivaling those of Kano and Timbuktu, its scholars debating law and theology with their counterparts across the Islamic world. Amina's personal wealth is legendary. She owns vast estates, enormous herds of horses and cattle, and commands resources that would be the envy of European monarchs. But she has not gone soft. She rides, she trains, she inspects garrisons personally. In her mid-40s now, she remains physically formidable, a lifetime of martial discipline written into muscles and reflexes that younger warriors struggle to match. And she still leads campaigns, though they are now consolidation operations rather than wars of conquest, putting down rebellions, intimidating restive tributaries, reminding the world that the warrior queen still has teeth. And yet beneath the glory, beneath the unprecedented prosperity and military dominance, a shadow is growing. Not an external threat, not a rival kingdom or a new coalition, something quieter and more implacable than any enemy Amina has ever faced. Time. Amina is getting older. The campaigns that once exhilarated her now exhaust her. Injuries that healed in days during her 20s linger for weeks. She moves more carefully, conserves energy more deliberately. The warriors who have served with her for decades see it, even if no one dares speak of it openly. Their queen is aging, and she has no children, no heir, no clear successor. The question that will define Zazzau's future after Amina, the question that she herself must lie awake at night contemplating, is taking shape in the silence between military victories and administrative triumphs. What happens when she is gone? What survives when the woman who holds everything together is no longer there to hold it? Amina does not have an answer yet, but she is about to spend the last decade of her life searching for one. Even as one final military campaign tests her in ways she has never been tested before, and forces her to confront a truth that no amount of genius or willpower can overcome. The year is 1586. Amina has ruled Zazzau for 21 years. She is in her early 50s, ancient by the standards of a life lived almost entirely on campaign, on horseback, in the dust and heat and blood of a warrior's existence. Her body carries the map of those decades, scars from battles whose names have been forgotten, joints that ache when the cold harmattan wind blows down from the Sahara, a stiffness in her movements that she hides from her court but cannot hide from herself. But her mind is still the sharpest weapon in Hausland, and her mind is telling her something that she does not want to hear. To the west, the Nupe kingdom is growing. Not slowly, not subtly, growing with the aggressive confidence of a state that has found a new source of power. European traders on the Atlantic coast are selling the Nupe something that changes everything: firearms. Not many, not yet, crude matchlock weapons that are as dangerous to the user as to the target. But the Nupe are learning, they are adapting, and they are building a military force that does not depend on cavalry charges and earthwork walls. A military force that, given enough time and enough European guns, could challenge Zazzau's dominance in ways that swords and spears never could. Amina sees the future more clearly than anyone around her. The trans-Saharan trade routes that built Zazzau's wealth are not going to last forever. Atlantic trade is growing. Coastal kingdoms with access to European ships are getting richer while inland kingdoms watch their relevance slowly erode. If Zazzau does not control access to Western trade, if it does not bring the Nupe into its orbit before the Nupe become too powerful to absorb, then everything Amina has built will be outflanked, not by a coalition of jealous neighbors, but by the tide of history itself. Her advisors urge caution. The Nupe are not a border tribe to be swept aside in a summer campaign. They are a sophisticated kingdom with deep roots, strong defenses, and a warrior tradition of their own. A campaign into new territory means crossing rivers, marching through unfamiliar forests, fighting far from Zazzau's supply bases and fortified settlements. And there is the thing that everyone thinks but only the bravest advisors say aloud. Perhaps this is a campaign for a younger general. Perhaps the Queen should direct strategy from the capital, while commanders she has trained lead the army in the field. Amina's answer is the same answer she has given her entire life when someone suggests she cannot do something. She will lead personally. She has always led personally. To send someone else now would tell the world that the warrior queen is finished, that age has done what no army, no coalition, no enemy could do. It would invite every ambitious rival, every restive tributary, every kingdom that submits to Zazzau out of fear rather than loyalty, to begin recalculating. And recalculation, in the world Amina inhabits, is the first step toward rebellion. In late 1586 or early 1587, Amina assembles an army and marches west. It is not the massive force of her peak years, perhaps 15,000 warriors, all that Zazzau can spare without leaving its vast territories undefended. But it is still a formidable army, seasoned, disciplined, led by commanders who have been fighting under Amina's banner for decades. The early phase of the campaign follows the familiar pattern. Smaller kingdoms between Zazzau and Nupe territory submit quickly. Amina's reputation is a weapon that arrives before her cavalry. Rulers who have heard the stories of the coalition war, who know what happened to those who defied the warrior queen, choose survival over valor. Tribute is paid, allegiance is sworn, the army moves on. But as Amina's forces push deeper into Nupe-controlled territory, the character of the campaign changes. The Nupe have been watching. They have studied Amina's tactics from previous wars, the rapid cavalry movements, the feints and diversions, the psychological warfare, and they have prepared. River crossings are fortified and defended in depth. Forests that Zazzau's cavalry cannot easily penetrate are used as natural fortifications. The Nupe avoid large-scale battles where Amina's tactical genius would be most dangerous, instead fighting a war of attrition, ambushes, raids, harassing attacks that bleed Zazzau's forces one skirmish at a time. They burn their own crops and drive away their own livestock, denying Amina the ability to feed her army from conquered territory. They are using her own strategies against her, and they are using them well. For the first time in decades, Amina is facing an enemy that does not break. An enemy that has studied her, that respects her enough to prepare thoroughly, that fights not with the desperate courage of the outmatched, but with the cold discipline of soldiers who believe they can win. The advance slows to a crawl. Every river costs casualties. Every fortified town requires days or weeks to reduce. Amina's supply lines stretch thin across hostile territory. The same vulnerability she exploited so brilliantly against the coalition is now her own weakness. Disease begins to move through the camps. The rains come, turning roads to mud, bogging down cavalry, rotting food stores. And then comes the ambush. Amina is leading a reconnaissance, a cavalry patrol probing ahead of the main army, mapping terrain, searching for Nupe positions. It is the kind of mission she has led 1,000 times. The kind of mission that younger commanders should be leading while a 54-year-old queen directs operations from a safe distance. But Amina has never directed from a safe distance in her life, and she is not going to start now. The Nupe have been tracking her movements. They know her habits, her tendency to lead from the front, her refusal to delegate the most dangerous work. They have positioned a force 3 times the size of her patrol in a river valley that Amina's scouts have not fully mapped. When the trap closes, it closes fast. Cavalry slam into Amina's patrol from 3 sides. There is no room to maneuver, no space for the kind of tactical brilliance that has defined her career. This is close-quarters killing, swords and spears and screaming horses in a confined space where numbers are all that matter. And the numbers are against her. Amina's personal guard, men who have sworn their lives to her protection, men who understand that if the queen dies here in a muddy river valley hundreds of miles from home, Zazzau dies with her, form a ring of iron around her. They fight with a ferocity that goes beyond training, beyond discipline, into something more primal. They fight the way men fight when the thing they are protecting is more important than their own lives. For minutes that must feel like hours. The outcome balances on a blade's edge. Zazzau warriors fall, Nupe warriors fall, the river runs red. Amina herself is fighting. At 54 years old, wounded, exhausted, she is still swinging a sword, still dangerous, still refusing to be the kind of queen who lets other people die for her while she watches from safety. Reinforcements arrive from the main body of the army. The Nupe, having failed to kill or capture their prize, withdraw before they are overwhelmed. When the dust settles and the dead are counted, Amina is alive, bleeding from several wounds, none fatal, but each one a message from a universe that does not care about legends or legacies. You are mortal. You are aging. And one day, your God will not arrive in time. The campaign continues. Of course it does. Amina would sooner die than retreat from a fight she started. But it continues differently. Her commanders insist, and she grudgingly accepts, that she will no longer lead reconnaissance patrols. She will no longer place herself at the point of maximum danger. She will command from positions where her mind, still the most valuable asset in Zazzau's arsenal, is protected from the random violence that kills brilliant generals and mediocre soldiers with equal indifference. It takes another year, a grinding, exhausting, costly year of river crossings and sieges and skirmishes and disease and the slow, brutal arithmetic of attrition warfare. But by late 1588, the Nupe leadership recognizes what Amina recognized long ago. This war will not produce a clean victor. Only two exhausted kingdoms bleeding each other to death while their rivals watch and wait. Peace terms are negotiated. The Nupe agree to trade agreements favorable to Zazzau. They agree to pay tribute. They acknowledge Amina's authority over disputed territories, but they retain their kingdom, their independence, their military capability. It is a compromise, the first true compromise of Amina's career. She has won, but not the way she is accustomed to winning, not completely, not on her terms alone. The army returns to Zaria in early 1589. There is a procession, as always. Amina rides at its head, as always. The people line the streets and cheer, as always. But those who know her, the commanders who have ridden beside her for 30 years, the courtiers who have watched her govern with fierce intelligence and tireless energy, can see what the cheering crowds cannot. Something has shifted, not broken, not defeated, but shifted. The way a building shifts when its foundation develops a crack that is invisible from the outside, but changes everything about the structure's relationship with gravity. Amina is tired. Not the tiredness of a single campaign which sleep and food can cure. The tiredness of a life lived at maximum intensity for 56 years. The tiredness of a body that has been asked to do things that bodies are not designed to do for decades on end. The tiredness of a mind that has been carrying the weight of a kingdom, its survival, its prosperity, its future, since before many of her current soldiers were born. And now, finally, she turns her attention fully to the question she has been circling for years. Succession. What happens to Zazzau when Amina is no longer Zazzau? She has no children. This is the consequence of the choice she made decades ago. The choice not to marry, not to be owned, not to become a piece in someone else's political game. It was the right choice. It was the choice that made everything else possible. But it has a cost, and the cost comes due now, in the quiet years at the end of a spectacular life. Amina elevates commanders. She positions administrators. She strengthens institutions, the tax systems, the judicial structures, the trade agreements, the garrison networks, trying to make them strong enough to function without her personal attention. She is trying to transform a kingdom that runs on the genius and charisma of one extraordinary woman into a kingdom that runs on systems and structures that do not require genius, that can be operated by competent, ordinary people after the extraordinary one is gone. It is the hardest project of her life. Harder than conquering the Quararafa. Harder than breaking the coalition. Harder than anything she has done with a sword or a cavalry charge. because she is fighting against human nature itself, the tendency of power to concentrate around individuals, the tendency of institutions to decay without a strong hand to maintain them, the tendency of ambitious men to tear apart anything that stands between them and a throne. She continues to rule actively through the late 1580s and into the 1590s. Smaller campaigns, putting down rebellions, reminding distant governors that the Queen's eye still reaches their provinces, maintaining the appearance of strength even as the reality slowly, imperceptibly shifts. She adjudicates disputes in her court. She receives emissaries from distant kingdoms. She prays in the mosques she built and discusses theology with the scholars she endowed. She is still formidable, still sharp, still capable of silencing a room with a glance or inspiring loyalty with a word. But the years are closing in, and everyone can see it. The exact date of Amina's death is lost. The oral traditions that preserved her story across 5 centuries do not agree. Some say 1610, others as late as 1617. Most modern historians settle on approximately 1610, which would place her at roughly 77 years old, an almost impossible age for her time and circumstances. The most persistent tradition about her death is this: she dies on campaign. One last military expedition, the purpose of which varies depending on who tells the story. Some say she was putting down a rebellion in a distant province. Others say she was defending against an incursion on Zazzau's western border. The specific target does not matter. What matters is the image. An old woman, a queen, a conqueror, refusing to sit in her palace and wait for death to find her, riding out to meet it on her own terms, the way she met every challenge of her life, on horseback, at the head of her warriors, in the field. If that is how it happened, and there is something in the consistency of the tradition that suggests it might be, then it is the ending Amina would have chosen, not the slow diminishment of a monarch fading in a palace bed, attended by physicians and priests. A warrior's death, clean, purposeful, one last ride. But a death, no matter how it comes, is only the end of a person. It is not necessarily the end of what they built. When news reaches Zaria that the Queen is dead, the grief is real and the danger is immediate. Multiple factions, military commanders, royal relatives, ambitious nobles begin positioning for power. It is the moment Amina feared, the moment every empire built around a single extraordinary individual must eventually face. And here is where Amina's final project, the project of institution building, of creating systems that outlast their creator, faces its ultimate test. The succession is not peaceful. Hausa politics do not work that way. There are negotiations that are really threats. There are alliances that are really betrayals waiting to happen. There are moments when violence seems inevitable, when Zazzau appears ready to tear itself apart, the way so many kingdoms have torn themselves apart when the strong hand at the center is removed. But Zazzau does not tear itself apart. A successor is chosen, not the most powerful general, which would have triggered revolt from the others, not a weak figurehead which would have invited invasion from outside. A compromise candidate, competent, acceptable, capable of holding together what Amina built, even if incapable of matching what she achieved. In the decades after Amina's death, her empire contracts, distant territories break away. Tributary states that submitted to Amina's personal authority feel no such loyalty to her successors. The vast domain she carved across Hausland slowly recedes back towards Zazzau's historical core. But, and this is the point, this is the thing that matters, Zazzau itself survives. It does not collapse. It does not get conquered. It does not descend into the permanent civil war that destroys so many kingdoms built around a single leader. The walls hold. The trade routes function. The administrative systems continue to operate. The military traditions Amina established continue to produce capable warriors and commanders. Zazzau endures because Amina built it to endure, not just with walls and armies, but with systems and institutions and a culture of governance that could survive the loss of its founder. It is not as glorious without her. It is not as powerful, but it is alive, and it remains one of the major Hausa city-states for centuries after her death. The walls outlast everything else, long after the political arrangements have shifted, long after the specific trade routes have changed, long after the names of Amina's successors have faded from memory. The walls remain. Red earth packed tight by engineers who answered to a queen 500 years ago, eroded by rain, cracked by roots, partially buried by the slow accumulation of centuries, but present, physical, undeniable. When archaeologists map these fortifications in the 20th century, they find a network so extensive that it reshapes their understanding of pre-colonial West African civilization. Walls with bases 20 feet thick, heights that still reach 20 feet in places after 5 centuries of erosion. Hundreds of miles of connected fortifications stretching across what is now northern Nigeria. The scale is almost incomprehensible for a pre-industrial society, and it testifies to something that no amount of colonial revisionism can explain away: a kingdom of extraordinary sophistication, led by a ruler of extraordinary vision, existed here, built this, left proof in the earth itself. There is a particular cruelty in how history treated Amina after her death. For centuries, her story survived the only way it could, in the mouths of griots and grandmothers, in songs sung at festivals, in proverbs repeated so often that people forgot they were about a real woman. Oral tradition kept her alive, but oral tradition also transformed her, the real woman, the strategist, the economist, the administrator. The woman who understood supply lines and tax systems and the political management of a multi-ethnic empire was gradually replaced by a legend, a giantess, a sorceress, a woman who took a new lover after every battle and killed him at dawn. These mythical versions are not accidents. They are what happens when a patriarchal culture tries to process a woman who defied every category it had for women. She cannot be a wife. She refused marriage. She cannot be a mother. She had no children. She cannot be a temptress. She was a military genius who outthought the best male commanders of her era. She does not fit. And so the stories reshape her into something that fits, a supernatural being, an exception that proves the rule, a figure so far outside normal humanity that her achievements do not threaten the assumption that normal women cannot do what she did. When European colonial historians encountered these legends in the 19th and 20th centuries, they did what colonial historians always did with African achievements. They dismissed them. Amina became a myth, a folk tale, an African fairy story with no historical basis. This was convenient. If Amina was real, if an African woman built an empire and commanded armies and constructed fortifications that still stand, then the entire justification for colonialism, the idea that Africans needed Europeans to bring them civilization, collapses under its own weight. It took decades of painstaking work by African and sympathetic Western scholars to recover Amina from mythology and restore her to history. They used the Kano Chronicle, a historical document written in Arabic that contains information dating back centuries. They collected and cross-referenced oral traditions, identifying consistent elements across dozens of different versions to separate probable fact from later embellishment. They studied the walls themselves, physical evidence that no amount of historiographical bias can wave away. Carbon dating, architectural analysis, comparison with other known fortifications from the period, all of it confirming what the Hausa people never forgot. The walls are real. They date to the right period. Someone built them, and every tradition without exception says that someone was Amina. Today, Amina's rehabilitation is well underway but far from complete. Statues stand in Zaria and Lagos. Her image appeared on Nigerian postage stamps in 1975. Schools bear her name. She is taught in Nigerian classrooms as a symbol of what Africans achieved before colonialism and what women can achieve when barriers are removed. An animated series introduced her story to a new generation of African children in 2017. But outside of West Africa, she remains largely unknown. The average person who can name a dozen European monarchs and half a dozen ancient generals has never heard of Queen Amina of Zazzau. This is not because her achievements are less impressive. It is because the machinery of historical memory, textbooks, films, museums, popular culture has been built to amplify certain stories and silence others. European history is treated as universal history. African history is treated as regional trivia. Male conquerors are celebrated as world historical figures. Female conquerors are treated as curiosities. Amina's obscurity is not a failure of her legacy. It is a failure of ours. But here is what gives me hope when I think about this woman and the distance between what she achieved and how little of the world knows her name. The walls still stand. 500 years of weather and neglect and deliberate erasure, and the walls still stand. You can go to northern Nigeria today and put your hand on red earth that was packed into place on the orders of a woman who refused to accept the life her world tried to assign her. You can touch something she built. You can feel the weight and permanence of it under your fingers. And in that moment, the distance between the 16th century and the 21st century collapses. And you are standing in the presence of a human being who looked at impossible odds and said, "I will build something that lasts." She was not a legend. She was not a myth. She was not a supernatural being or a fairy tale character. She was a woman, a specific, particular, historical woman. Born around 1533, trained as a warrior, crowned as a queen, brilliant as a strategist, visionary as an economist, relentless as a builder. She made mistakes, she paid costs, she compromised when she had to and fought when she could not. She grew old and tired and mortal, the way every human being grows old and tired and mortal, no matter how extraordinary their life. And she built walls that are still standing 5 centuries after her death, in a world that tried its absolute hardest to forget she ever existed. If you are hearing this story for the first time, and statistically most of you are, then you are part of something important. You are part of the correction. Every person who learns Amina's name, who understands what she achieved, who carries her story forward into conversations and classrooms and dinner tables, every one of you is doing the work that 500 years of bias and erasure tried to prevent. You are remembering someone the world tried to forget, and that matters. Here at Mementos Historians, this is what we do. We dig into the stories that were buried, not because they were unimportant, but because someone decided they were inconvenient. We tell them the way they deserve to be told. Complete, unflinching, with the respect that history owes to the people who made it, regardless of where they were born or what they looked like, or whether the world was ready to take them seriously. If that matters to you, if you believe that the full story of humanity is more powerful and more beautiful than the edited version we were handed in school, then subscribe. Stay with us. There are so many more stories like this one, buried under centuries of silence, waiting for someone to listen. But for now, for this moment, there is only Amina, a girl born into royalty who chose the sword over the bridal chamber, a princess who earned the loyalty of warriors who had every reason to dismiss her, a queen who defeated a coalition twice her size through brilliance and nerve and the absolute refusal to accept defeat as an option. A builder whose walls have outlasted empires, outlasted colonial occupation, outlasted every attempt to reduce her to a footnote or a fairy tale. She rode at the head of 20,000 warriors. She conquered territories that would become nations. She built fortifications that are still standing half a millennium later, bearing her name, testifying to her existence in a language that does not require translation. Red earth, packed tight, still here. That is the story of Queen Amina of Zazzau, warrior, queen, builder, the woman who proved with sword and stone and the sheer unbreakable force of her will, that history belongs to those who refuse to be erased from it. Remember her name.